Listen to this. There are silences that do not sound like peace, but like a door slammed in your face. One day, everything seemed to have a place, a continuity, a logic that could hurt or confuse, but at least it existed. And the next, you find yourself staring into a void that does not answer, a cold absence that did not even have the decency to explain itself. You were erased from their life as if your questions were a nuisance, as if your story with that person could be ripped away without consequences. And that is when the most humiliating trap of all begins. Believing your worth got buried inside an answer that never came. Tell me honestly, are you going to keep chasing an explanation that weakens you? Or are you going to take back control before that silence destroys you from the inside out? The uncomfortable truth is that when someone cuts you out without an explanation, they do not just leave. They also push you into a mental war where, if you are not careful, you end up hurting yourself. Not because of what that person did, but because of everything you start imagining, interpreting, and chasing afterward. The problem is not always the abandonment. Many times it is the dependency it exposes. And that is why this blow, cruel as it is, can also become a breaking point. The moment you understand that you do not need to beg for closure to keep your dignity, the whole game changes. It is no longer about getting back the person who left. It is about stopping their silence from continuing to rule your mind. In this video, you're going to go through a much deeper path than the usual easy advice about pretending not to care or playing hard to get. We're going to step into 9 hard, strategic, necessary points so that if someone has blocked you out of their life without a word, you do not turn that wound into humiliation, obsession, or emotional servitude. And we are going to do it through a wisdom that has spent more than 2,000 years teaching men not to break over what they cannot control. Stoicism. Because by the end of this journey, you will not just see that silence differently. You will understand how to use it to rebuild yourself with a strength you may have never known before. Stay with me, Gabriel here. Welcome to the Stoic Garden. Today we are going to walk through 9 essential points to turn this kind of silent rejection into clarity, inner control, and real dignity. And the last one may completely change the way you interpret the person who erased you from their life, and above all, the way you return to living your own. The first thing you need to understand is this. When someone cuts you out of their life and also denies you an explanation, what destroys you most is not their decision, but your need for that person to justify it so you can breathe again. That is where the silent degradation begins, because you are no longer trying to understand. You are trying to get permission to let go, and that puts you on your knees, whether you admit it or not. You have reached the first point of this journey. Do not beg for explanations from someone who erased you without mercy. Listen to this dangerous idea, the one so many people repeat without thinking, I need closure. It sounds mature, it sounds reasonable, it almost sounds therapeutic, but many times it is nothing more than an elegant way of knocking on a door that has already been shut. You want one last conversation, a clarification, a sentence that will bring order to the chaos. You want that person to say something that fits the pain into a story you can bear. But human reality is rarely that neat. Sometimes they do not give explanations because they do not care to. Sometimes because they are cowards. Sometimes because they do not want to see themselves in the mirror of what they did. And sometimes simply because they have already chosen to move on without you and do not feel any moral obligation to explain themselves. Yes, it hurts. But it hurts even more when you turn that lack of response into a chase that empties you out. Seneca, who understood well the cruel nature of badly directed passions, left a simple and fierce warning. We suffer more in imagination than in reality, and that is exactly what happens here. Because the other person's silence is already a fact, but your mind refuses to leave it alone. It magnifies it, translates it, rewrites it, turns it into an inner courtroom where you are the accused, the lawyer, and the victim all at once. What did you do wrong? Why did you not even get a goodbye? What is it about that indifference that makes you feel smaller? Look closely. You are not looking for an objective explanation. You are looking for emotional absolution. And that is an incredibly dangerous place to be, because the person who erased you should never have the authority to decide how much you are worth. Humiliation never begins with one grand dramatic act. It begins with small concessions of dignity. One more message, one phone call, just to understand. Checking whether they have unblocked you yet. An excuse dressed up so it does not look like begging, when in reality that is exactly what it is. just with better wording. And that is where the brutal irony of all this comes in. The more you try to force an explanation out of them, the more you confirm to the other person, and to yourself, that their silence has power over your stability. As if your peace needed someone else's signature, as if your dignity were waiting on administrative approval. Ridiculous, yes, but thousands of people live like that without even realizing it. Epictetus taught that it is not events that disturb a man, but the judgment he forms about them. And that line was not meant to decorate a wall with a touch of wisdom. It was made for this exact moment. The fact is simple and cruel. Someone pushed you away without giving you a reason. The destructive judgment appears when you turn that act into a verdict on your identity. If they erased me, I must not be worth much. If they did not explain, I must not have mattered. If they left like that, then everything was a lie. Watch how your mind manufactures poison out of someone else's behavior. Watch how it hands over your inner government to someone who is not even present anymore. That is where you have to cut it off. You do not need to fully understand someone who acted without nobility in order to start protecting yourself. You do not need one last conversation to recognize that they hurt you. And you do not need the other person to admit their pettiness in order to recover your center. Some people leave with explanations and still destroy. Others leave in silence and force you, without meaning to learn a harsher lesson. Not every wound comes with closure, but every wound demands character. The first act of power here is not understanding everything. It is stopping the begging for clarity from someone who has already shown you through their actions the kind of darkness they carry inside. If someone erased you without mercy, stop running after the dust of their footsteps. Do not turn their cowardice into your routine. Do not romanticize what was in truth a lack of respect. Silence communicates too, and sometimes it communicates something very simple. There is no place for you there anymore. Accepting that wounds your pride, but chasing explanations wounds your soul. And at this stage of your life, you need a hard truth, not a comforting fantasy. The explanation they did not give you cannot keep being the center of your existence, because the day you stop begging to understand the person who chose to erase you is the day you will finally begin to understand yourself. After the first blow comes the most dangerous move of all, running after what has already left, and almost no one recognizes that moment honestly, because chasing rarely presents itself as open desperation. It disguises itself as genuine interest, as a need to clear things up, as a noble impulse to save something valuable. But do not fool yourself. When someone has shut the door on you and you keep pushing, what began as rejection starts turning into humiliation. Now it is time to talk about the second lesson. Stop the chase before rejection turns into humiliation. Chasing is not just sending messages, it is checking their status, looking for indirect hints, asking other people, reinterpreting old conversations, imagining scenarios where they finally respond the way you think you deserve. Chasing is staying emotionally available to someone who already cut off your access without hesitation. And the problem is not only that it does not work, the problem is what it does to you. Every failed attempt strips away another layer of self-respect. Every unanswered gesture drags you a little farther into the position of the one who keeps insisting while the other person decides whether you exist at all. Do you see the imbalance? One person lives, the other waits. One has already taken distance, the other is still negotiating with a ghost. Marcus Aurelius wrote that the happiness of your life depends upon the quality of your thoughts. He did not say that from some comfortable tower, but from the discipline of a man who knew that an unguided mind becomes a tyrant. And when you chase someone who has already rejected you, your thinking becomes degraded. It no longer thinks clearly, it thinks out of need. It no longer observes reality, it tries to bend it. It no longer protects your integrity. It looks for a crack in the wall so it does not have to accept what is obvious. You start justifying the unjustifiable. Maybe they are confused. Maybe they just need time. Maybe if I explain how I feel better. Of course, because nothing inspires attraction quite like someone ignoring their own dignity in real time. Here it is worth stopping for a moment and asking yourself something uncomfortable. What exactly do you expect to gain by chasing? That they will change their mind out of exhaustion? That they will admire your persistence? That they will finally give you the value they refused to give you when they could have done it without pressure? Chasing starts from a childish fantasy. The idea that if you insist enough, the other person will realize what they are losing. But most of the time, the opposite happens. Your insistence does not raise your value, it cheapens it, because you are showing that you will still be there even after being mistreated. And when you teach that, you also teach people how they can keep treating you. Musonius Rufus, a teacher of practical discipline, taught that character is formed by practicing precisely what we would rather avoid. And here, what you would rather avoid is the emptiness, the withdrawal, the feeling of not getting the last word. That is why you chase, because stepping back with dignity requires more strength than insisting in anxiety. Insisting is impulsive, almost automatic. Stopping, by contrast, requires inner mastery. It requires accepting that there are battles no longer fought by saying more, but by refusing to keep exposing yourself where there is no reciprocity left. And that decision, though it may look passive from the outside, is inwardly a very high form of courage. Chasing also has a poisonous effect that almost no one talks about. It turns you into a spectator of your own degradation. Deep down, you know you are lowering yourself, and still you keep going. You know every attempt leaves you worse off, but you go back again. You know they are not giving you any real signs, but you manufacture meanings out of crumbs. And then the inner fracture appears. One part of you begs to get closer, while another watches you with shame. That division wears you down more than the rejection itself, because now it no longer hurts only because of what the other person did. It also hurts because you are watching yourself betray the standard you claim to deserve. Stopping the chase does not guarantee that the pain will disappear, but it does stop the pain from becoming a spectacle, and that alone is already a great deal. Some rejections wound you, yes, but still leave your spine intact. Humiliation begins when you actively participate in your own collapse, when it is no longer just that you are being rejected, but that you are helping the process along by insisting where they already told you no, even if they said it through cold and cowardly silence. You do not need to reach that point. You can stop sooner. You must stop sooner. So step out of that miserable race where you always lose a little more of yourself. Do not dress up disordered attachment as perseverance. Do not call it self-respect to keep fighting for a place you have already been thrown out of. And do not confuse courage with persistence when the only thing driving you is fear of accepting the loss. Sometimes the noblest action is not to move forward, but to stop. Not because you are giving up, but because you respect yourself enough not to turn someone else's rejection into a humiliation crafted by your own hands. After you stop the visible pursuit, a quieter and more treacherous phase begins. You no longer write, you no longer call, you no longer expose yourself in the same way, but you are still attached. How? By checking, watching, interpreting, searching in tiny details for proof that you still exist in the mind of the person who cut you out of their life. And this is where many people fool themselves into thinking they have already let go, when in reality, they have only changed the way they crawl. We have reached the third point of this video, and it is this. Break the obsession with looking for signs where there is no longer a place for you. The wounded mind hates a vacuum. It needs to complete the story, even if it has to invent it to do so. That is why it clings to absurd signs, whether they viewed your profile, whether they were online at a certain hour, whether they posted an ambiguous quote, whether they asked about you through someone else, whether they listened to that song, whether they unfollowed a certain person. Everything becomes material for interpretation. Everything seems to hide a clue. And meanwhile, you keep surrendering your peace to a ridiculous activity disguised as deep intuition when it is really nothing more than anxiety with a vivid imagination. Because when there is no longer a real place for you in someone's life, checking for signs does not bring you closer to the truth. It drags you deeper into an exhausting fiction. Epictetus said that before reacting, we must examine the impression that reaches the mind and ask whether it deserves our assent. That discipline sounds simple, but here it becomes decisive. Every supposed clue you notice arrives inside you as an impression. Maybe they miss me. Maybe it was not that final. Maybe I still mean something. And instead of testing it, you embrace it because it serves you emotionally. But since when is a need the same as evidence? Since when is a digital trace worth more than a clear decision to exclude you? The problem is not that automatic thoughts appear. The problem is that you hand over your judgment to them as if they were sacred messengers. This obsession also has a particular cruelty. It keeps you in a permanent state of alert. You no longer live your day, you scan it. Every move the other person makes can alter your mood. A story they post triggers you. Prolonged silence crushes you. The smallest change on any platform makes you build a whole novel in seconds. And so you end up enslaved by the lowest form of modern emotional life, watching someone who already decided not to open the door to you. It is almost grotesque. You become an obsessive interpreter of empty signs, as if your life depended on translating smoke. Donald Robertson, in bringing together Stoicism and psychology, reminds us that questioning our automatic interpretations is the first step in weakening the power of irrational thoughts. And that is exactly what you must do here. Do not ask what every sign means. Ask what you're trying to avoid by checking it. Because most of the time you are not looking for information, you are looking for relief. You want a small spark that lets you stay hooked without admitting it. You want to postpone acceptance. You want to hold on to a microscopic hope so you do not have to face the full truth. But every hope built on crumbs ends up tasting the same: dependency. There comes a moment when you must say enough and understand that dignity is also expressed in what you choose to stop looking at. Not everything deserves your attention. Not every curiosity deserves to be fed. Not every unease has to become action. If someone erased you, blocked you, or pushed you out of their emotional field, insisting on reading signs is like trying to sneak in through the window after being thrown out the front door. It sounds harsh, because it is. But it is also freeing, because the moment you accept that you do not need to decode everything, the mind stops running after every shadow. Marcus Aurelius wrote that soon you will have forgotten everything, and soon everyone will have forgotten you, so act rightly now. There is no cynicism in that idea. There is clarity. Life does not ask you to obsessively interpret every gesture from another person. It asks you to govern your inner world with decency. And decency in this case means giving up the emotional spying that is consuming you. Not because you do not care, but because you understand that compulsively watching someone who no longer wants you close is a slow form of self-abandonment. Breaking this obsession does not mean you will stop feeling curious overnight. It means you will stop obeying that curiosity. It means that every time the impulse appears, you will remember that not every impulse deserves to be followed. And that is where a new kind of freedom begins. The freedom of not living on edge for signs where there is no longer any place for you. When you stop looking for yourself in the traces of the other person, you will begin to find yourself in the only place that matters, your own mind, finally cleared of a vigilance that should never have become your home. One of the most destructive traps this kind of abandonment leaves behind is this. You begin to believe that the way someone treated you reveals what you're really worth. If they erased you without explanation, you assume you were not enough. If they never spoke to you again, you conclude that you were not important. If their silence was cold, you think your place in their life meant nothing. And without noticing it, you turn another person's behavior into a verdict on your identity. And that brings us to the fourth lesson of this journey. Stop treating silence as a measure of your worth. This mistake is born from a deeply human habit, looking outward to figure out who you are. If you are chosen, you feel worthy. If you are sought after, you feel valuable. If someone explains themselves to you, you feel respected. But when all of that is missing, you collapse, because you never learned to hold on to your worth without someone else reflecting it back to you. So the other person's silence stops being just an absence of words and becomes a judgment you invent against yourself. You turn it into a private verdict. I did not deserve clarity. I was not that important. I'm not worth enough to be treated with consideration. And at that point, you are no longer only suffering a loss. You are helping deform your own sense of self. Cleanthes, one of the ancient guardians of the Stoa, argued that another person's judgment does not determine the true measure of a man, because inner consistency is worth more than outside opinion. Applied to your present wound, the fact that someone treated you coldly does not prove your smallness but their limit. The fact that someone chose cowardly silence does not define your worth but their character. But of course, that reading requires maturity. It is much easier to swallow the poison and assume that if they did this to you, there must be something defective in you. The wounded mind always prefers painful explanations to open uncertainty. At least then it feels like it understands something. Now be careful not to swing to the other extreme. This is not about turning into a proud statue that never examines itself. Sometimes you did make mistakes. Sometimes you gave too much where you should not have, spoke from need, tolerated signs of contempt you should never have normalized. But it is one thing to examine your behavior honestly, and quite another to turn another person's silence into the total measure of your being. Can you learn from what happened? Yes. Should you turn it into proof that you are worth less? No. A failed relationship, a broken bond, or a cruel absence can teach you a great deal. What they cannot do, unless you allow it, is define your dignity. Marcus Aurelius wrote something brutally useful. If someone despises you, examine whether what they say is true. If it is, correct yourself, and if it is not, let their words return to them. Here there were not even words. There was silence. And that silence only has the power you lend it. Examine whatever in yourself needs to be examined. Correct whatever needs correcting. But do not carry a sentence that another person did not even have the courage to pronounce. Some people stay silent not because you are worth little, but because they are worth little when it comes to facing what they have done. It is wise not to confuse one with the other. Treating silence as a measure of your worth also traps you in a perverse dynamic. The worse you feel about yourself, the more you think about the other person, and the more you think about the other person, the more power you give them to keep defining you. It is a miserable cycle. That is why you must break it at the root. Your worth does not rise when someone answers you, and it does not shrink when someone excludes you. Your worth is expressed in how you act when you do not receive the treatment you wanted. That is where your inner structure is revealed. That is where it becomes clear whether you collapse in search of approval or move through the wound without selling yourself cheap. There is a fierce irony in all of this. Many people who made you feel replaceable have not even built themselves with any real solidity. They live reacting, avoiding, running from their own discomfort. But you, precisely because you were hurt, have the chance to do something they may never do. Become more conscious, stronger, more selective, more in command of yourself. Are you really going to let the silence of an immature person decide how you see yourself in the mirror? Are you truly going to hand that kind of privilege to someone who could not even say goodbye with integrity? Stopping yourself from treating that silence as a measure of your worth does not erase the pain, but it strips the pain of the right to become your identity, and that changes everything. Because now you no longer see yourself as the discarded one, the inadequate one, or the forgettable one. You see yourself as someone who went through a profound lack of respect and chose not to translate it into self-contempt. That difference may seem subtle, but it separates the person who breaks from the one who is tempered by the fire. And you are no longer here to keep calling truth what was only a badly interpreted wound. There comes a point in this process when you are no longer chasing, no longer checking for signs with the same compulsion, and you begin to see more clearly the damage you were dealt. But right there, another temptation appears, more subtle and more elegant. To dress it all up so it will not hurt as much. You tell yourself that maybe it was not that serious, that perhaps the other person was confused, that deep down they did care, even if they did not know how to show it, that the silence was a clumsy way of suffering. And so, little by little, you turn a concrete wound into a comforting fantasy. Here, we enter the fifth principle of this video. Accept the wound without inventing fantasies to soften it. The mind does this because it hates the raw impact of reality. It prefers a warm lie to a cutting truth, so it invents shades where there are none, depth where it does not exist, noble intentions inside cowardly behavior. Not because you are naive, but because you are hurt. And the hurt want to preserve something, even if it is only a beautified version of what happened. They want to think there was badly managed love rather than indifference. They want to believe the other person is also suffering in silence, that they did not know how to act, that one day they will explain everything and then the blow will make sense. But do you see the problem? You are still depending on an imaginary story to endure what happened. Seneca wrote that anticipating imaginary misfortunes is like carrying a weight reality may never impose. Here, a cruel variation of that same trap appears. You manufacture imaginary interpretations so you do not have to carry the exact weight of the reality that actually did happen. And both things pull you away from your center. Because instead of looking at the fact with steadiness, you cover it with an emotional fog that keeps you from learning. Reality, however hard it may be, can be worked through. Fantasy, by contrast, turns into a swamp. It keeps you suspended between what happened and what you wish had happened. You neither accept nor move forward, you only manage an illusion. Accepting the wound does not mean dramatizing it or turning yourself into a martyr. It means calling it by its name. It hurt you. It affected you. It broke an important expectation. It made you feel displaced, confused, maybe humiliated. That is real. And recognizing it does not weaken you. It clears you. Because as long as you keep decorating what happened, you will stay tied to a falsified version of your experience. The problem for many people is not that they did not suffer, but that they never allowed themselves to suffer honestly. They spent their time reinterpreting the blow until it became tolerable, and in that effort, they made it endless. Viktor Frankl, a man who knew what it meant to go through suffering without any disguise, said that when a situation cannot be changed, the challenge shifts to transforming the person who faces it. That idea is essential here. You cannot rewrite the way you were left out. You cannot demand after the fact a nobility that was never there. But you can decide not to contaminate your healing process with stories that only delay acceptance. The wound does not need to be beautified. It needs to be lived through. And to live through it, you need an inner sobriety that most people avoid, because they would rather keep dreaming than close their eyes and admit, "They hurt me," and that is enough to understand that there was no healthy place for me there. Fantasies also come with a moral cost. The more you justify the other person in your mind, the less you protect yourself. You take weight away from their actions and add it to your confusion. You end up defending someone who never defended you, understanding someone who never considered you, giving emotional complexity to a person who may have simply acted selfishly, full stop. And no, not everyone is a wounded soul incapable of expressing love. Sometimes people simply choose badly, act badly and move on. You do not have to turn every act of cowardice into a Greek tragedy to make it seem deeper. Musonius Rufus taught that true philosophy transforms conduct, not just speech. Applied to you, that means real acceptance is not shown by wise phrases, but by concrete decisions. Stop idealizing, stop reinterpreting, stop softening what was already clear enough in its facts. If they erased you, they erased you. If they stayed silent, they stayed silent. If they did not care for the bond, they did not care for it. The bluntness of these phrases is not meant to wound you more, but to bring you back to solid ground where rebuilding begins. Because no one rises from fantasy. You rise from truth. So accept the wound the way you accept a fresh scar, without pride, without theatrics, without denial. There is no need to turn pain into poetry to give it dignity. It is enough not to lie to yourself. It is enough to stop protecting an image of the other person that no longer deserves protection. And it is enough to understand that truth, though it hurts more at first, heals better than any manufactured comfort. Because the day you stop softening what was done to you is the day you will start hardening in the right way what you carry inside. Once you stop chasing, stop checking for signs, stop measuring your worth by someone else's silence, and stop sweetening the wound with fantasies, a higher possibility finally opens up. Using distance not just to separate yourself from the other person, but to regain command of your own mind. Because creating physical distance is relatively easy. The hard part is removing from the center of your thoughts the person who still takes up too much space inside you. This is the sixth step you need to understand. Use distance to regain control over your mind. Distance is not a punishment for the other person, nor is it a cold pose to make yourself look strong. It is a tool of mental hygiene. It helps your thoughts stop revolving around one single person, one single scene, one single wound repeated to exhaustion. As long as you keep emotional access points open, any memory drags you back, any symbol sets you off, any coincidence knocks you off balance. But when you bring in real distance, you begin to break that circuit. The stimulus loses strength, the obsession weakens. The mind, which used to react like a startled animal, finally begins to breathe. Marcus Aurelius wrote that when you rise in the morning, you should remember that you are meant to do the work of a human being, not to complain, not to spin endlessly around an offense, not to live hostage to an absence. That idea is not cold. It is freeing, because it reminds you that your life has more dignified tasks than endlessly chewing over the behavior of someone who left. Your mind was made to judge, build, direct and discern, not to remain hijacked by a broken bond as if nothing else existed under the sun. Distance begins to heal when you give your attention a nobler purpose than repetition. Now, do not fool yourself with shallow versions of this practice. Taking distance is not simply a matter of not texting. Some people never send another message, yet spend the entire day mentally talking to the person who is gone. They wake up thinking about them, work thinking about them, fall asleep arguing through imaginary scenarios with them. That is not distance. That is inner cohabitation without external contact. And sometimes it is even worse, because since no one sees it, it looks like you are fine. What is the point of moving your body away if your mind is still on its knees? Massimo Pigliucci has pointed out that serenity comes from clearly distinguishing between what depends on our judgment and what belongs to the impersonal course of the world. Here the application is direct. What the other person felt, decided, interpreted, or kept silent about does not depend on you. What does depend on you is how much mental space you still give them. It depends on you what you do when the memory appears. It depends on you whether you feed the scene again or redirect your attention with discipline. That is the exact point where you recover power, not by controlling the past, but by regulating the present use of your awareness. Distance then has to become practical. Put your habits in order. Reduce unnecessary triggers. Stop exposing yourself to what pulls you back in. Fill your hours with actions that require real presence. Serious work, exercise, reading, deliberate silence, concrete tasks that bring you back to your body and the present moment. Not because productivity magically heals pain, but because a mind without structure becomes fertile ground for relapse. And relapse here does not always look dramatic. Sometimes it looks like an entire afternoon lost imagining impossible conversations while your real life keeps waiting for you to come back and live it. Donald Robertson notes that training the mind every day is just as essential as training the body, because without mental discipline, any hardship grows larger. And that explains why so many people feel unable to leave behind a story that has already ended. They have never learned to interrupt their own mental loops. They confuse feeling with obeying, remembering with returning, thinking with understanding. But not every thought deserves an altar. Not every emotion deserves to be followed all the way through. Sometimes the greatest act of self-respect is simply cutting off a mental chain before it drags you back into the same pit again. So use distance intelligently and firmly, not to act strong but to actually become strong. Not so the other person notices your absence, but so you notice your return, because that is the real goal of this chapter. For your mind to belong to you again. For it to stop being a hallway where the same shadow walks through over and over. For it to recover direction, hierarchy, order. And when that happens, you will understand something decisive. Distance, used well, does not pull you away from anyone important. It finally brings you back to yourself. There is a decisive difference between someone having left your life and you having closed off their access to your inner world. Many people think both things happen at the same time, but they do not. The other person may be completely gone and still keep entering your emotional world whenever they want, without lifting a finger, without speaking to you, without even knowing it. All it takes is a memory, a date, a song, a scene replayed in your mind, and once again they are in charge. Once again they alter your mood. Once again they take the throne. Now it is time to move on to the seventh key of this video. Shut off the emotional access that absence still controls. As long as that access remains open, any attempt at rebuilding will be unstable. You may look functional, even strong at times, but inside you will still be conditioned. The problem is not only that you think about that person, the problem is that their absence still has the power to decide how you feel. And that means the bond, though broken outwardly, is still alive in its most dangerous form, invisible dependency. You do not need contact to be under someone's control. Sometimes all it takes is leaving a door open in your emotional system and allowing the echo to come and go as it pleases. Epictetus insisted that the person who desires only what depends on their own will never be forced to act against reason. Apply that to your case. As long as you still want the other person to repair what they broke, explain what they kept silent about, or give back what they took, you remain dependent on an external factor in order to stabilize yourself. And that makes you vulnerable. Closing the emotional access does not mean you stop feeling immediately. It means you stop granting that story the right to rule your day. It means saying, yes, this hurt me, but it will no longer have the authority to decide my thoughts, my impulses, or the way I move through the world. This is where an uncomfortable question appears. Why do you keep letting inside you someone who already pushed you out of their life? Out of loyalty to what it once was, out of hope that they will change, out of fear of accepting that if you close it completely, then it is truly over. Look closely at the trap. Sometimes you do not keep the emotional access open because you still love deeply, but because you cannot tolerate the emptiness that comes with shutting it down. You would rather have an active wound than a final absence. You would rather keep feeling something, even if it degrades you, than face the clean silence of a door closed by your own will. Ralph Waldo Emerson, so close in spirit to Stoic strength, wrote that nothing can bring a person peace but themselves, when they choose to remain faithful to their own inner law. That faithfulness now requires limits, not toward the other person who may no longer even be there, but toward your own concessions. A limit to nostalgia that beautifies, a limit to the recurring thought that invites you to reopen the old scene, a limit to the habit of giving sacred importance to someone who no longer takes part in your real life. Because emotional access is not closed with a beautiful phrase. It is closed every time you interrupt the habit of offering your center again to someone who does not deserve it. There is also something that needs to be said plainly. Many people never come back physically, yet live for years installed in the mind of the person they left behind. That is their unintended victory. Not because they are extraordinary, but because the other person never learned how to evict them. They turned them into a reference point, a foundational wound, a hidden measure for future relationships. And so an old absence keeps managing the present. That is not love. That is a lack of inner closure. And if you do not resolve it now, you will carry that shadow into every new bond, contaminating what has not even had the chance to begin clean. Musonius Rufus taught that the most effective teaching is the one that transforms conduct. So let this show in your actions. Stop mentally revisiting the place where you were broken. Stop treating that story like a relic. Stop speaking to them in your head as if they still had privileged audience inside you. Closing emotional access does require a certain strictness with yourself, yes, but it is a noble strictness. Not to harden you in the wrong way, but to save what is still alive and worthy inside you. When you manage to do it, something changes at a deep level. You no longer react with the same inner violence. You no longer feel that any memory can kidnap you. You no longer confuse intensity with truth. And then you understand that the absence only held power because you kept letting it pass. The day you close that access firmly, it will stop being a power and return to what it always should have been, a fact from the past, not a master in the present. After closing off emotional access, something inevitable remains: emptiness. And this is where many people fall again, because they think that if they are no longer fixated on the other person, then the worst is over. But it is not. For many, the worst begins right here, when they are faced with an inner space that used to be occupied by anxiety, obsession, fantasies, or waiting. Suddenly there is real silence, free time, energy with nowhere to go, and if you do not know what to do with that, emptiness becomes a pit. We have reached one of the most important keys in this video. Number 8, turn the emptiness into discipline, not desperation. Emptiness is not comfortable. It never was. That is why so many people would rather fill it with anything than endure it with clarity. Some mentally return to the past. Others look for immediate substitutes. Others throw themselves into new relationships without having cleaned anything up inside. And others, the most dangerous to themselves, turn that space into a theater of self-pity where the same scene repeats every day. They did this to me. I can't handle this. No one understands this. That is how emptiness stops being a transition and turns into an identity. And when that happens, the wound does not just hurt anymore. It starts organizing the personality. Cleanthes declared that nothing great can be sustained without constant effort, because virtue is a daily conquest, not a permanent possession. That idea fits here with brutal precision. Emptiness is not overcome by waiting passively. It has to be worked, ordered, tamed. There will be days when you do not feel like it, when you miss the old intensity, even if it was destructive, because desperation also creates a strange kind of familiarity. At least it made you feel occupied by something. Discipline, by contrast, seems dry at first, repetitive, almost thankless. But that is exactly why it saves you, because it does not depend on mood. It depends on commitment. Turn that empty space into structure. Get up at a decent hour. Move your body even when your mind protests. Read even when you feel no enthusiasm. Write even if all that comes out at first is confusion. Work with more intention. Walk without your phone like an addict looking for a hit of emotional distraction. Learn to sit with yourself without running straight back into noise. Does that sound austere? Of course. And what were you expecting? Some magical ceremony where inner peace descends on you while you keep living exactly the way you did before? Serious transformation has never worked that way. Ryan Holiday repeats a powerful idea. Excellence does not come from occasional inspiration, but from the deliberate repetition of high standards. Applied to your wound, that means you are not going to rebuild yourself because of one brilliant moment of clarity, but through a series of small, steady, sustained acts that teach your mind a new way of living inside itself. You do not need to feel strong in order to act with dignity. You need to act with dignity long enough for strength to begin to look like you. Here it is worth asking a question that stings but brings order. When there is no one left to check on, imagine, or wait for, who are you? That question is frightening because it leaves you alone with yourself. And yet that is where everything begins. Emptiness, used well, forces you to discover what remains of you when the drama is gone. What habits sustain you? What thoughts govern you? How capable you are of living without turning suffering into inner entertainment. That is a high test of character. Not everyone can bear it. Not everyone resists the temptation to return to chaos just because order still does not feel exciting. Marcus Aurelius wrote that you should do each thing as if it were the last of your life, free from distraction, apathy, and hypocrisy. That line should follow you here, because emptiness can become a school of presence or a hole of desperation. It all depends on how you fill it. If you fill it with discipline, it becomes fertile ground. If you fill it with anxiety, it rots. There is no neutral option. The space left by that absence is going to shape something in you either way. The only question is whether it will shape steadiness or disorder. So turn emptiness into a practice of rebuilding. Do not wait until you feel ready. Do not wait for all sadness to disappear. Use that hollow space the way you would use a ravaged field, by clearing it, planting it, and working it again with brutal patience. Because when emptiness stops being desperation and becomes discipline, you are no longer simply surviving what happened. You are building a version of yourself that could not have been born any other way. And that, even if you cannot fully see it yet, is preparing you for the highest truth in this entire journey. After everything you have gone through, you arrive at the highest and most uncomfortable point of all. Because up to now, it was still possible to think that this whole process was about resisting better, suffering less, or even making the other person one day understand what they lost. But it is not. The true culmination of this path is not learning to endure abandonment more effectively, but transforming it into an inner position from which you no longer need anything from the person who erased you. All of this leads us to the 9th point, and perhaps the most uncomfortable of all. Make silence your dignity, and your retreat your strength. The final mistake many people make is continuing to see silence as a misfortune they have to endure, instead of turning it into a choice that elevates them. As long as you live silence as punishment, you will remain emotionally beneath the other person. You will keep feeling that something was done to you, and that now your only option is to endure it. But when you understand that not responding, not begging, not insisting, not justifying yourself, and not going back can also be a form of nobility, then the whole structure changes. You are no longer someone who was cast out trying to piece themselves back together. You are someone who chose not to degrade themselves where they were not treated with honor. Seneca, who understood like few others the moral strength of restraint, wrote that we often regret having spoken, but rarely regret having kept silent with prudence. That prudence is not passivity. It is inner hierarchy. It is knowing that not every wound deserves a scene, that not every injustice deserves one more explanation, that not every loss requires a final word. Sometimes the greatest proof of character is to walk away without spectacle, without threats, without memorable speeches, without the childish need to leave one last line that sounds like victory, because dignity does not always make noise. Sometimes it simply leaves and does not come back. This is where life's sarcasm becomes almost elegant. Many people think power means getting a reaction, provoking regret, or leaving the other person haunted by your absence. But that is still borrowed power, dependent power, miserable at its core. True strength appears when you no longer need to produce any effect in the person who hurt you. No surprise, no guilt, no nostalgia, no return, nothing. You leave, and in that retreat you recover something far greater than someone else's attention. You recover authority over yourself, and that cannot be compared to anything else. Epictetus taught that you should not explain your philosophy, but embody it in your actions, and let your conduct be your argument. This is the clearest application of that teaching in the entire video. Do not say you have self-respect while you are still emotionally circling the wound. Do not repeat that you understand now if you are still fantasizing about the moment the other person finally recognizes your worth. Embody it. Stay silent where you once would have begged. Walk away where you once would have insisted. Hold your absence with the same firmness with which you once held your dependency. That will be your argument. That will be your answer. That will be your way of saying that something in you is no longer available for degradation. Because walking away is not losing. Losing was staying longer than you should have, trying to convince, translate, hold on, and wait. Walking away is stopping the bleeding. It is no longer giving psychic presence to someone who no longer truly participates in your life. It is accepting that some doors do not deserve to be knocked on one more time, not because what was behind them did not hurt, but precisely because it hurt too much to keep disrespecting yourself. Do you not see the full reversal? Before you thought your strength was in enduring the other person's silence. Now you understand that your strength is in making your own silence a boundary. Viktor Frankl wrote that between stimulus and response there is a space, and in that space lies our power to choose. This entire journey has brought you here, to the space where you can choose who to become after being erased without explanation. You can lower yourself again, interpret, justify, wait, or you can choose something rarer, stricter, and cleaner, to turn your silence into a form of self-respect and your retreat into a declaration of maturity. Not because you no longer care about what happened, but because you will no longer allow what happened to keep defining how you treat yourself. And then the final lesson arrives, the one that reorders everything that came before it. Silence is only a wound as long as you live it as abandonment. The moment you turn it into dignity, it stops being defeat. And retreat only looks like loss as long as you do it with nostalgia and need. The moment you do it with clarity, it becomes strength. That is the summit of this path. Not making the person who erased you come back, not making them understand you, not making them regret it, but becoming someone so whole in their retreat that they no longer need anything from the person who once thought they could break them. If you have made it this far, then you already know you are not part of the majority. Most people hear truths like these and immediately start looking for an easy way out, an elegant excuse, a small hope to keep clinging to. They would rather keep interpreting signs, dressing up wounds and calling love what was really dependency. But you stayed, and that means that, at least for a moment, you were willing to look at this pain without decoration and recognize that continuing as before would also be a form of betraying yourself. Now the decision is yours. Go back to begging inside yourself for what you should no longer ask for outside, or begin living with a dignity that does not need permission. It is not enough to have listened. It is not enough to have nodded in silence while something inside you said this was true. What matters begins after this video, when no one is watching, and you have to decide how you are going to act in front of that emptiness, that memory, that temptation to lower yourself again. That is why I want you to write it in the comments as a real stance. Write the phrase, "My silence is my power," and tell me what country you are listening from. Not as an automatic gesture, but as a public declaration of the person you are choosing to be from this point on. Gabriel here, and this is the Stoic Garden. This channel does not exist to entertain your wound or give you soft comforts that leave you exactly where you already are. It exists to remind you that inner peace, self-respect, and moral clarity are not begged for. They are built. We are not here to beautify the fall, but to transform the way you rise again. And if you know someone living under the control of an absence that still rules them, share this video with them. Sometimes a hard truth arrives right when someone was about to keep destroying themselves in silence. Subscribe and become part of this community if what you are looking for is not distraction, but a higher way to live, think, and carry yourself. And do not stop here, because this subject does not end with this reflection. What you open today needs depth, practice, and continuity. In the next videos, we will keep walking that path so that you do not just understand these truths, but learn how to truly embody them in your life.